A dual-income household looks safer on paper. You have two paychecks hitting the account every month. You have a higher total number at the bottom of the tax return. Common sense says that if you have two engines on an airplane, you are twice as safe as a plane with one engine. But in personal finance, that logic actually breaks down. In fact, for millions of middle-class families, adding a second income didn't double their safety margin. It eliminated it. We call this the two-income trap. It is a specific financial phenomenon where a couple bakes both incomes into their fixed costs, the mortgage, the childcare, the two car payments, so tightly that if either person loses a job, the whole structure collapses immediately. You might feel rich because cash flow is high, but if your fixed costs are matching that cash flow, you are actually living on a razor's edge. Today, I want to walk you through why two earners are often closer to bankruptcy than one, and exactly how to fix the math without quitting your job. I've been looking at the data from Elizabeth Warren and Amelia Tyagi, who literally wrote the book on this, alongside some alarming census studies. The story we tell ourselves is that families are going broke because they buy too many lattes or flat-screen TVs. But the data shows something much more boring and much more dangerous. Families are going broke because they are competing for a middle-class life that now requires two incomes just to cover the basics. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to break down the mechanics of this trap. We will look at the housing market, the hidden tax of childcare, and the loss of what I call in-house insurance. By the end of this, you will see your monthly budget differently. You will see that optionality, not just income, is the true measure of wealth. Before we dive into the hard numbers on bankruptcy, I want to mention that this channel is effectively a peer review system for your wallet. I spend hours digging through Federal Reserve reports and bankruptcy filings so you don't have to. If getting a 30-minute deep dive into the mechanics of money is a good ROI on your time, go ahead and subscribe. It tells the algorithm that we want more signal and less noise. All right, let's look at the old model versus the new model, because the shift is massive. To understand the trap, we have to look at the old model. Now, I am not romanticizing the 1950s or suggesting we go back there. Socially, that era had plenty of problems. But purely mathematically, the single-earner household had a massive hidden financial asset. They had a spare adult. In a traditional single-income home, the family budget was sized to fit into one paycheck. It had to be. That meant the mortgage, the groceries, and the utilities were all covered by Person A. Person B was at home. In financial terms, Person B was a fully funded emergency reserve. If Person A got sick, injured, or laid off, Person B could enter the workforce to bridge the gap. Or, if a child got sick or an elderly parent needed care, Person B provided that labor for free. There was slack in the system. The family was flying on one engine, but they had a spare engine sitting in the cargo hold, ready to be mounted on the wing if things went wrong. Now, look at the modern dual-earner household. On the surface, they look wealthier. They have two incomes. But here is the catch. Over the last 40 years, families didn't just bank that second income. They used it to bid up the price of admission to the middle class. Because both parents are working, they need two reliable cars. They need paid childcare, which is effectively a second mortgage. And most importantly, they use that combined purchasing power to buy a home in a good school district. The bank looked at both salaries and said, "Great, you qualify for a $600,000 mortgage." So the family took it. Now, the mortgage, the cars, and the childcare consume 95% of both paychecks combined. Mechanically, this family has no spare engine. They are flying a heavier plane that requires both engines running at 100% power just to stay in the air. If one engine fails, if one person loses a job, the plane doesn't glide, it crashes immediately. That is the definition of the two-income trap. The tricky part here is the psychology. If you ask this couple, "Why are you spending so much?" they won't list luxuries. They will list necessities. They aren't buying yachts. They are paying for a safe neighbourhood, a decent education for the kids, and daycare so they can go to work to pay for the house. It feels like a treadmill because it is one. Warren and Tyagi argue that families didn't use the second income to get ahead. They used it to just stay in place. When everyone has two incomes, the price of housing in desirable areas rises to meet that new capacity. It is an arms race. If you are the only family bidding with one income, you lose the house to the family bidding with two. So, you both work, you bid up the price, and you end up with the same house but twice the work hours and zero margin for error. You have converted your safety net into a monthly mortgage payment. Let's look at the hard math of fixed costs. In a resilient budget, your fixed obligations, the bills you must pay or face foreclosure or repossession, should be maybe 50% of your take-home pay. In the two-income trap, fixed costs often hit 75% or 80%. I've seen budgets where a couple brings in $8,000 a month, but their mortgage is $3,500, childcare is $2,000, car notes are $1,000, and student loans are $500. That is $7,000 out the door before they buy a single grocery item or pay the electric bill. They have $1,000 of discretionary money for food, gas, and clothes. If one partner loses a $4,000 a month job, they are instantly underwater by $3,000 a month. They don't just cut back on vacations, they default on the house. This high fixed cost structure turns a temporary setback into a total solvency crisis. And because they have no spare adult to send into the workforce, they have no lever to pull to fix it. Now, you might be thinking, Tom, this sounds like a theory. Surely having two paychecks is better than one in the real world. Well, hold on. This is where the data gets ugly. If you think making more money automatically protects you from bankruptcy, you are wrong. The statistics actually suggest that adding that second earner, if you aren't careful, increases your probability of going bust. Let's look at the bankruptcy filings. A study linking US census data to bankruptcy filings tested this exact thesis. They looked at married households and controlled for things like age, race, and education. They found that dual-earner households were about 10% more likely to file for consumer bankruptcy than similar one-earner households. Think about that. The family bringing in two checks was more likely to go broke than the family bringing in one. Why? It goes back to that fixed cost exposure. The one-earner family knows they are on a tightrope, so they keep their expenses lower. The two-earner family feels invincible, so they leverage up. When you are highly leveraged, small bumps in the road cause crashes. The study highlighted that while two incomes provide more cash, they also encourage a higher average propensity to consume and accumulate debt. There is a fascinating nuance in the data regarding timing. In the very short run, having two incomes does protect you. If you look at a one-year window, the dual-income family is less likely to file for bankruptcy because they have cash flow right now. But if you look at the subsequent years, their risk skyrockets. It's a delayed fuse. What happens is that the lifestyle creeps up to match the income. It takes a few years to buy the bigger house, lease the nicer cars, and enroll in the premium private school. Once those contracts are signed, the trap is set. The data suggests that two-earner households are essentially trading short-term stability for long-term fragility. They are smoothing out the little potholes, like a $500 car repair, with their extra cash, but they are digging a massive trench that they will fall into if a recession hits. Bankruptcy lawyers will tell you there are three things that cause nearly 90% of filings for families with children: job loss, medical problems, or divorce. In a single-earner home, you have hedges against these. If the earner loses a job, the non-earner can start working. If a child gets sick, the non-earner is already home to care for them. But in a two-income trap home, these triggers are lethal. If you lose a job, you lose 50% of the income required to pay the mortgage. If a child gets seriously sick, one parent often has to quit their job to provide care, which means you lose income exactly when expenses go up. And divorce? Divorce destroys the two-income model instantly, splitting the income base while doubling the housing overhead. The very things that cause bankruptcy are the specific risks that dual-earner households are least equipped to absorb. The darkest part of the Warren and Tyagi research is the correlation with children. Having children is actually the single best predictor that a woman will file for bankruptcy. This is counterintuitive. You would think parents would be more responsible and careful. They are. But they are also facing costs that childless couples don't face. They are the ones buying the 3-bedroom house in the safe zone. They are the ones paying for childcare. They are the ones who can't just move into a studio apartment if the economy tanks. The trap is largely a parent trap. It is the result of parents trying desperately to give their kids a middle-class start, and in doing so, constructing a financial life that is so brittle it shatters under pressure. You might be looking at your budget and thinking, okay, I'll just cut Netflix and stop eating out. That won't save you. The two-income trap isn't built on discretionary spending. It is built on the biggest check you write every month: housing. And specifically, the hidden tax of the good school district. Let's talk about the bidding war. Housing prices in the US are largely determined by what the marginal buyer can afford to pay. When the norm shifted from one income to two, the purchasing power of the average family doubled. But the supply of houses in good school districts did not double. It stayed exactly the same. So, what happened? Families just bid the prices up. If every family on the block has two incomes, the price of the house rises until it absorbs both incomes. It is a zero-sum game. You aren't getting a better house than your parents had, you are getting a similar house, but now you have to work twice as many hours to pay for it. The two-income trap argues that the second income didn't buy more luxury. It was simply absorbed by inflation in the housing sector, driven by the competition for school. The banks are co-conspirators in this. When you go for a mortgage pre-approval, they look at your gross income. They take partner A's $70K and partner B's $70K, combine them to $140K and say, "Congratulations, you can afford a $3,500 monthly payment." They do not account for the fact that to earn that second $70K, you have to pay for childcare, commuting, and convenience food. They don't look at your net safety margin. They look at your gross debt-to-income ratio. This encourages families to max out. I always tell people, the bank does not care if you sleep at night. The bank cares if they can sell your loan to Fannie Mae. Just because they will lend you the money doesn't mean you can afford the risk. The bank assumes two incomes will continue forever. You should assume they won't. This housing burden is almost entirely driven by the school district premium. In the US, access to good public schools is tied to your zip code. This turns education into a real estate product. Parents feel they have no choice. If they buy the cheaper house in the bad district, they worry they are compromising their children's future. So, the expense feels non-negotiable. It is an emotional purchase disguised as an investment. This is why dual-income couples stretch so far. They aren't trying to show off a granite countertop. They are trying to buy a specific third-grade teacher. And that desperation makes them price-insensitive, which drives the trap even deeper. The result is that housing costs lock you in. You can cut your grocery bill next week. You can cancel cable tomorrow. You cannot get out of a 30-year mortgage or a 12-month lease overnight without massive penalties or foreclosure. This is what makes the trap a trap. It is the illiquidity of your lifestyle. When a shock hits, like a job loss, you can't downsize fast enough to save the ship. The monthly burn rate is fixed. This is why high housing costs are cited as a primary driver of financial stress in children's lives. It limits what families have left for everything else. You end up being house poor, working 2 jobs to pay for a living room you are never sitting in because you are always at work. So we have the mortgage, but now we need to look at the work tax. There is a pervasive myth that if you earn $50,000, you bring home $50,000. But for the second earner in a household, that is mathematically impossible. In fact, after you run the real numbers, you might be working for minimum wage and not even know it. Let's run the calculation on the second income. Let's say the second partner goes back to work and earns $50,000 a year. That sounds like a lot of money, but first, the government takes its cut. And because this income sits on top of the first income, it is often taxed at the couple's highest marginal rate. Then you have Social Security and Medicare. Now you have the costs of working. You need a second car, gas, insurance, and maintenance. You need professional clothes. You buy lunch out more often because you are tired. And the big one, childcare. If you have 2 kids in daycare, that can easily be $25,000 a year. Suddenly, that $50,000 salary is whittled down. You might only be adding $5,000 or $10,000 of actual, usable cash to the household bottom line. But you have given up 40 hours a week and taken on the risk of a high overhead lifestyle to get it. The Federal Reserve's recent report on economic well-being put a number on this. The median monthly cost for full-time childcare is around $1,400. For many families, that is more than their rent or mortgage was 10 years ago. It is literally a second mortgage, but you don't get any equity for it. Dual income households spend significantly more on this than single income households, obviously. But it creates a rigid floor for your expenses. You cannot just pull the kid out of daycare for a month if money is tight. You will lose your spot. So, it is a fixed cost. This means both parents must keep working just to pay the person who watches their kids while they work. It's a cycle that churns a lot of money, but builds very little wealth. Then there is the transportation trap. A single earner family can often get by with one reliable car and maybe a beater, or one car and public transit. A dual earner family usually needs 2 reliable vehicles because both people have to be at work at 9 a.m. in different locations. That is 2 car payments, 2 insurance premiums, and double the repair risk. If the second earner's car breaks down, they can't get to work to earn the money to fix the car. It introduces another point of failure into the system. Transportation costs are the second largest line item for most households, and the 2-income model almost guarantees you maximize that cost. When you add up taxes, childcare, and commuting, the profit margin on the second income is often incredibly thin. I've seen breakdowns where a spouse works full-time and nets about $2 per hour after all related costs are deducted. Now, there are non-financial reasons to work: career continuity, personal fulfillment, mental stimulation. Those are valid. But purely financially, if you are working for $2 an hour while doubling your household's bankruptcy risk, you need to look at the strategy. The trap is assuming that $50,000 in salary equals $50,000 in wealth. It doesn't. It often equals $45,000 in new obligations and $5,000 in cash. We've talked about the money going out, but the biggest loss in the 2-income trap isn't the cash. It's the loss of the ultimate safety net: time. We have structured our lives so that there is literally no one left to handle the emergencies. I want to go back to the concept of in-house insurance. In the old single-earner model, the non-working partner was a labor reserve. If the roof leaked, they fixed it, or dealt with the contractor. If the kid was sick, they handled it. This kept out-of-pocket costs down. Today, when both parents work, every problem must be solved with money. Roof leak? Pay a guy. Kid sick? Pay a nanny or take unpaid leave. We have monetized all domestic problem solving. This makes the household much more sensitive to cash flow shocks. We have removed the shock absorber from the car, so now we feel every single bump in the road as a financial rattle. Think of it like driving without a spare tire. If you have a stay-at-home partner, or a partner working part-time flexibly, you have a spare tire in the trunk. If the main earner gets a flat, job loss, you bolt on the spare, the other partner gets a job, and you keep driving. It might be slower, but you don't stop. In the two-income trap, you are already driving on all tires. You have no spare. If one goes flat, you are stranded on the side of the highway, waiting for a tow truck that might be the bankruptcy court. You have cashed in your insurance policy to pay for the premium leather seats. So, how do we fix this? We can't change the housing market overnight, but we can change our household constitution. The gold standard for financial safety is this: one-income lifestyle, two-income potential. You should strive to keep your fixed costs, mortgage, cars, utilities, low enough that they can be covered by one salary, whichever salary is the stable one. This requires making hard choices. It might mean a smaller house. It might mean driving used Toyotas instead of leasing new SUVs. But the payoff is massive. If you can live on one income, the second income becomes pure wealth accelerant. You can save 100% of the second paycheck. You can max out retirement accounts, pay off the mortgage in 10 years, or build a huge cash cushion. When you live on one income and bank the second, you regain your power. If your boss becomes toxic, you can quit because you don't need that specific paycheck to pay the mortgage next month. If your kid needs extra help at school, one of you can step back to part-time without facing foreclosure. You are buying freedom, not just stuff. The goal isn't to force one parent to stay home if they want to work. The goal is to make the second income optional. As soon as the second income becomes mandatory to keep the lights on, you have stepped into the trap. Step back out by attacking your fixed costs. Refinance, downsize, sell the expensive car. Give yourself some slack. On a spreadsheet, two incomes always look safer than one. But life isn't a spreadsheet. Life is messy. Jobs are lost, people get sick, and roofs leak. If you use your two incomes to stretch for the biggest house, the maxed out childcare, and the luxury car payments, you aren't reducing your risk, you are doubling it. The real flex in the modern economy isn't needing both paychecks just to stand still. The real flex is structuring your life so that one income covers the basics, and the second income buys you margin, wealth, and choice. That is how you bulletproof your family against the trap. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how the math works on renting versus buying, which is a huge part of this equation, check out this video here. I'll see you there.